Section 4.7 is going to be looking at the other method to solve quadratic equations, which is called quadratic formula. The thing about quadratic formula is that this will actually work on all quadratics. Like, you can't always factor, you can't always take square root of both sides. Completing the square you can do pretty much with all quadratics, but that's usually not your favorite one if you have a choice. But the nice thing about quadratic formula is it's going to work all the time for you. All right, so what you have here, of course, this represents your quadratic. This will be the form that you need to have your quadratic in. You'll need to have the equation set equal to 0, and you'll want to arrange these terms so that they're in descending order. So in your formula, of course, you'll notice here you have an a and here you have an a, so that's always going to be the coefficient of the x squared. Of course, you've got b in these two spots. That'll be the coefficient of the x, and then the c that you have in your formula will be your constant. Now, this is a formula that you will have to know on the day of the test, so make sure that you do spend some time trying to learn this formula. Don't wait until the last minute. Okay, so our first example, the first thing that I've got to do is actually get it in the correct form. As I said, your equation does need to be set equal to 0, which means I will need to subtract my 1. So I would have 3x squared plus 2x minus 1 equal 0. Okay, so that's going to mean that a is 3. Remember, a is going to be the coefficient of the x squared. B is going to be 2. That's the coefficient of the x. And C is going to be your constant, which is a -1. Okay, so I'm going to rewrite the formula here. Okay, substituting in our values. So first of all, I need b. So I have -b, so that means I'll have -2 plus or minus the square root. And I'll have b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. Okay, now underneath your radical, of course you can use a calculator to help you out with that, but do your 2 squared minus 4 times 3 times -1, and that is going to actually give you 16. Of course, in your denominator, 2 times 3 will give you 6. Okay, your next step will be to simplify your radical, which 16 happens to be a perfect square, so square root of 16 will just give you a whole number of 4. Now, in this case, since this worked out and it was a perfect square, and you get to this step, you don't have your radical sign left anymore, I will expect you to actually do the 2 calculations, meaning, work this out using the plus sign and then work it out using the minus sign. Okay, so with your plus sign, you would have -2 plus 4, so that's going to give you a +2 over 6, which would reduce to be 1/3. And then use the minus sign, so -2 minus 4 is going to give you -6 over 6, which will reduce to be -1. So that means that 1/3 and -1 will be your 2 answers for this quadratic. All right, looking at one more using the quadratic formula. The first thing that I'll have to take care of with this problem is getting it in the correct form. I do need to set it equal to 0 like I had to a while ago, but I also need to apply the distributive property here so that I can have my polynomial or my quadratic in descending order. So that would give me 2x squared minus 2x minus 3 equal to 0. Okay, so that would mean that my a is going to be 2. That comes, remember, from in front of your x squared. B is going to be negative 2. And C is going to be negative 3. Okay, so you would have negative B. So we'll have negative 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 2 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 3. And that's divided by 2 times 2. Okay, so here at the beginning of your formula, that would end up just being a positive 2. Okay, now again, underneath your radical, again, use your calculator to help you out with that part. Let's see, we're going to end up with so 28 is what we're going to end up with there. Now, 28 is not a perfect square, but just like we had to simplify radicals a while ago sometimes, or actually it was in the previous lesson, if you look at that list of perfect squares that I had written down, like I said in the previous section, you do have 4 that's on that list, and of course 4 will divide 28 evenly, because that would be 7 times. So square root of 4 is going to give me 2, and then the 7's just left underneath your radical. Now there's one more step of simplifying that you can do on this problem. The 2, and the 4, you can reduce all of those by 2. So that would mean that your final answer for this one would be 1 plus or minus square root 7 divided by 2. Now the last step that I did here with the reducing, sometimes you'll be able to do that step and sometimes you won't. When you reduce, it has to be all 3 of these numbers, the number here, the number in front of the radical, and the number on the bottom. But if you can only reduce 2 of those numbers, let's say it was only this one and this one, then you're not allowed to do that. It would have to be all 3, but that does not include the number under the radical. You can't ever do anything with it. It would have to be the number in front, and then this one, and then this one.